and their retiree healthcare benefits. With the CalPERS pension obligation, we've paid off our PERS side funds. Those no longer exist for either local safety or local miscellaneous. So now we're just paying the annual required employer rate, and the employees, at least on the local miscellaneous side, are paying the employee share, and then we're working toward that with the DOA negotiations as part of the negotiation discussion. I'm sorry, the annual required contribution for OPEB is not 642, it's 582. The reserve policy, we've got a required.
You've got 582.
Yeah, in the staff report, yeah, but I said 642. Okay. The reserve policy says an overall reserve requirement of 35%. It's broken down, as I mentioned, into two components. 15% is the emergency reserve, and 20% is an unallocated reserve. And then capital projects with the parcel tax. The town receives about $743,000 per year in capital projects contributions out of that $1.865 million. But we have, as you look at the budget, a 5-year capital improvement program, which lays out some capital projects that amount to closer to $9 million over the course of that 5 years. We're receiving $743,000 from the parcel tax. We received some Measure A funds. We received some Measure M funds, gas tax revenue. That amounts to about $1.2, $1.3 million per year. We're kind of a save, spend community. If we can't afford a capital project, we save money until we can, and then expend it as a capital project. About $250,000 is what we received.
Does that go through FTC?
Yeah, I think so. As an allocation.
Because they threatened to suspend our funds, so that will be the funds that they.
No, gas tax is a pass-through.
They have no control.
Correct.
That's direct to us from gas sales.
From who?
The gas sales, the sales of gas.
So it doesn't go through it.
And they can't touch it.
So we have that amount, about 1.2, 1.3 million per year. And so there's we'll get to the gap in a second. It's recommended that the Finance Committee take some time to evaluate and research some of these options, and this goes in concert with item number 7 on the agenda as well. Recommendations may not be immediately reached, and the expectation is that whatever comes out of the Finance Committee percolating up to the City Council would be implemented in fiscal year 14-15 moving forward. At the July 17th council meeting, the council directed that staff return at the August 21st meeting with a potential budget amendment to address the payment toward the town's OPEB liability for the current fiscal year. But again, the recommendations coming out of this committee would be prospective 14-15 moving forward.
And what was the date on that? When?
August 21st.
Oh,
This year.
and what is the recommendation that we're supposed to do?
Nothing from the Finance Committee. That's coming from staff in terms of a suggestion
Okay.
on the OPEB liability contribution from this unallocated balance. So that's the staff report. I'm free to go through it in more detail as we talk.
Well, I think what our mission here is to address these 3 items and do some homework on them if we feel it's appropriate, and then come up with a recommendation to the council. And some of these are daunting, and I think we can take them as they're listed here. With the,
I'm just standing up here just in case you want to write something on the board.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had a
So
question.
that's why everybody sits over there.
We're talking about unallocated money that's not already allocated to reserves. I heard a lot of dollar figures. How much money are we talking?
4.5.
1.5 million.
I mean 4.8. Sorry, 4.8. Now,
For just this year or
fiscal
for?
year.
this is
This fiscal cycle.
That's the current unallocated balance. It's a
So basically, we got
Continuing
$4
fund.
million that we don't know what to do.
4
We're being
point
asked to figure
4.8.
whatever it is. Is that, do I understand it correctly? Okay.
But that could grow from year to
Right.
year, depending on.
And our unfunded liability estimate at this point is about 7 million, right?
So
For
that's
OPEB.
just for
For
OPEB.
yeah.
So is this
7
4
million?
point something million a cumulative of some number of years, or is it just from the last fiscal year cycle?
No, it's cumulative.
Cumulative, okay.
Yes.
So what do we see every year effectively that's been adding to this cumulative? Is it 500,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $2 million? What is it?
It's probably about a million.
I wouldn't say $1 million goes in year after year.
Right.
I think it's
Question.
growing
Oh, I'm
as of
saying,
now.
I'm saying we have 4 million right now,
Yeah.
which is, had been built up over some number of years. What I'm asking is, how much per year has this buildup been? And then the next following question is gonna be, do we anticipate that continue? If the number is $1 million, like Robert said, that came for the last 4 years, total 4, that means next year we're gonna get $1 million, the year after that, we're gonna get $1
It's
million.
The last 2 years it
about
was zero.
500,000.
Well, that's what I'm asking, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, last year, what was last year?
it was like 0, and the years before, we had been deficit, and we had
Yes.
been using our reserves. and-
Right. No, I just am trying to find out how much we
5 years
have.
projection,
I
right?
don't have
The 5-year projection, the budget goes to a growing number 5 years from now, and it's a big number.
In fiscal year 2011, 2012, the excess revenues over expenditures were negative. So that drew from the reserves, as the mayor indicated, to the tune of about 1.1 million. In 12-13, it drew from reserves about 600,000. And at the end of 12-13, though, we had, the Facebook one-time allocation and a few other things. So at year end, it was a positive 492 that added to that round balance. And in this fiscal year, it's projected to add to that balance about 363,000 revenues over expenditures, excluding the parcel
Right,
tax.
so we roughly have 4 million to allocate to some projects and possible future income coming in future years. But we,
Well-
that, which is unknown.
Yeah.
Right.
But in 2 years, we had $1.6 million deficit.
Right, yeah, right.
And the last year, the last 2, and this year positive, we have about 800,000 positive.
Big time.
No, I'm not saying give the money away, I was just asking where it came from. I just wanted to know how much of the pot we had got here to play with.
If we look at this, in our budget, in 2011, 2012, our available fund balance was 600,000. And then 2012, 2013 was 488. And then 2012, 2013, it went up to 2.8 because we made all of those significant structural changes in the operation in 2011,
Yeah.
turning the ship around instead of depleting, and it grew, and then projected in 2013-14 is 4.8. Now, in this 2.8 from 2012-2013 budget, right, the available fund balance, there were some one-time only contributions from Facebook. We
Property
sued,
tax.
property tax increase, but we sued and got a
About
settlement
184,000,
from,
Westbury Development. It was
yeah,
a
that
Fletcher-
Fletcher Ridge project. So that kind of really bumped it up then, but,
And then you
because,
add in the parcel tax revenue, which kind of changes the picture a little bit. And as the mayor's looking at that page there, maybe she can elucidate, what we're actually looking at is increase or decrease in the general fund reserve line, which is right above the words net changes in fund balance.
right, increase, decrease, general reserve fund,
So in
okay.
11-12, you saw the
Does
decrease of
everybody have this?
15,000, no.
Well, this
It's
is
just
a
the budget.
budget.
Budget number, we have it, but we just don't.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to project future, I was just trying to say how much do we have now to figure out what basically.
489523.
Well, I think one important factor in this whole thing is it ought to be clear to everyone by now that we are under accruing for our retirement liability. That is, CalPERS is using numbers that are quite unbelievable, like assuming a 7.5% rate of return and discounting that to a present value of the liability, which is low. For example, Moody's has, and I think joined by some of the other auditing firms, has said that to have a qualified financial statement, you should be using, or a town or a government entity should be using 5.5%, which is more or less what's normal in the corporate sector. And if we did that, then, as I think Robert suggested at the very end here, the town could establish its own internal side fund and contribute the difference between the established CalPERS contribution rate
We were wrong.
Well, and that's really what item 7 is about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's easy.
Item 7 will do just
Okay.
exactly what you're talking about. So on item 6, I think we need to tackle these individually first. And maybe we should put off the pension another, right before we talk about item 7, because item 7 is a sensitivity analysis that will calculate some of the amounts for us.
Well, to Jim's point, perhaps, Chair, they are kind of tied together. I don't think, you got a set amount of money. I'm not sure you can make changes to capital projects and reserve policy without factoring in what you're gonna do for the pension contribution and the side fund. So they're kind of mixed. But we don't have the data on the pension or OPEB sensitivity analysis that item 7 talks about yet.
So we really don't have enough information then to decide on 1/3 of the proposed 3 items.
Correct.
Unless we
I
just,
think Al's probably more on top of it than.
right, but unless we just make an estimated target amount and say at least, for the next 5 years, we'll, add additional funds to accelerate that pay down according to this rate. Either a flat rate, amortization rate, or some kind of a declining payment schedule or something. I mean, I think that, just speaking publicly, one of our other council members is very keen on paying it down in a very short period of time and wanting to allocate a lot of money to.
To which? You'll
To
pay for
the, contribution to accelerating the pay down of the unfunded liabilities that we're facing.
For the pensions or the?
OPEB.
There.
OPEB.
Yeah, so, and at one point, in budget discussions, there was a chart that was presented to us as an example, and it was calling for, another 500 and some odd $1,000 on a straight line basis over, you were just, over a 10-year period, or was that a?
It was 5 years, and it was just taking a flat amount, $250,000 for OPEB, $250,000 towards pension, and just saying, let's contribute that set amount each year, going forward.
Over and above the ARC, over and
Right.
above the annual
Right.
Contribution.
required contribution.
And setting that aside until we can get further into finding what that gap is, based off of whatever analysis we choose to run, whether, the discount rate, CalPERS new smoothing and assumptions. But maybe coming up until we get to that point, maybe either a percentage or a flat amount. And that was just a starting point to think about.
Yes.
I have a question. This uncommitted amount of money, 4 million, whatever it is there anything that we haven't talked about that suddenly we need, that needs to be in other buckets? I mean, is there something?
Well, there's always an emergency risk.
Well,
Earthquake that could wipe.
No.
We have
no, that's not what I mean.
50% already allocated for emergencies. Do we need to add more to that emergency fund? Or do we need to add more than our 20% to our other,
Do we have any historical data, or let's say going back to the Loma Prieta earthquake, or
yeah,
some way
any
of
damage that
getting,
we had to do?
I mean, where did the 15% come from? Because
I'll tell you, it was right, in 2008, so I got on council in 2009, and so I'm the senior council member here, which is a strange spot for me to be in because I still feel like I'm cutting my eye teeth on the nuances of being a council member. However, in 2009, council was faced with looking at the Lehman Brothers loss and, you know, the whole thing. The world was unraveling and we were experiencing having a deficit. Our operations were high and we said, you know, we have got to create some kind of reserve policy, come heck or high water, that, you know, we're gonna take that off the top, an emergency fund, 15%, 20% for unassigned reserve, just to keep the wheels on if everything else falls off. And that was all that we could reasonably see that we could do and still, you know, stay afloat and eat away at some of our reserves over 2009, 2010. And at that point, we said, we've got to do something. And so it really is, that was the bare bones minimum that I think council felt that they could allocate, take off at the top.
At that time.
At that time.
And how much is that?
15% for emergency reserve for Loma
How
Prieta,
many
Tulsa.
houses
$1.5 million.
1 million, it's right here in your little staff.
1.5,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Done?
No,
I
right
mean,
now.
that was 15%.
I didn't get my question yet.
Yeah, I just,
Sorry.
The unreserved funds,
Fund balance.
if instead of 4 million, if it became 15 million, are there any issues?
Yeah, there are capital projects out there that the town has just not
Done.
done.
Addressed,
We've
yeah.
got, you know, streets, sidewalks,
Oh,
things
no,
like
You
that.
I think we're missing
You
his,
misunderstand my
yeah.
point. Because I'm big on the capital projects bandwagon. What I mean is, are there any negative ramifications of money, large amount of money is being amassed in the reserve fund not allocated to a bucket?
Yes,
explain
That's,
that.
explain that.
yes, those are clearly a target. The state will come in and try and identify, you know, they'll do a review of local agencies and, hey, they have the option to tax, they can get their own money. We'll reduce property tax receipts to local agencies like the ERAF transfer that we deal with every year. That was a shift to the state in order to fund their Prop 98 requirement, and local agencies lost. They can do that again if they identify local agencies as a whole that are bucketing hoarding money on
Yeah.
the side.
Amassing.
That's at the state level. At the local level, I would suggest that it's a target for the local parcel tax. If we're hoarding money on the side, why have this extra parcel tax?
Well, I
Yeah.
can see that argument being made. I
Yeah.
think likely will be made, but.
I would like
Okay,
to
so-
see.
So I just wanted to, so that your biggest concern is the state tries to take it back some.
That's only ERAC, is that right?
well, I mean, a
Well,
lot of
there's
other
more.
clients who look at that say, oh, they got more money than they need,
Yeah,
like the,
I find those a little
Yeah.
stretch,
yeah.
but there's no statute that we're running up against. That's,
No.
I guess, what I-
No legal problem, just perception.
Okay.
And I,
How much is that ERAC every year? Or
The
whatever?
ERAF is, this year was 892,000, but we budgeted 700,000.
Why don't you explain out what that is?
And in previous years, it's not been that much. It's kind of ratcheted up a little bit as property taxes have ratcheted up.
Right.
And at
Explain
any
to
point in
members
time,
what
they just stopped that
Yeah.
refund to us.
Well, the ERAF is called the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, and the state set that up to help backfill mainly the schools. Money was put in here through property tax increases, through like the triple flip, the VLF, and it gets put in there, and so when they have to backfill the state has to backfill the schools, they take that money from the ERAF and they try to make the local jurisdictions whole based off of that bucket, through the growth in property taxes and stuff. Well, what's been happening is the state, just recently, they changed their educational formulas. So, meaning the state's gonna have more money required to pay for the school district. So because of that, this ERAF looks to be the target, where we've had 3 counties, Marin, Napa, and San Mateo County, that have been excess ERAF. because of schools that have been, basically they're called,
Revenue limit.
revenue limit schools, meaning the schools, districts here, they produce enough property tax, through the property taxes for their tax rate to fund their schools. So that's where you get this excess.
In total,
ERAF.
funding in
Right,
total.
Right.
Right.
So that, that ERAF money now, the state is taking that money to make us whole. The ERAF money.
To make us whole for what?
For like triple flip tax, sales, the triple flip is, back in 2004, the state did a bond, where they bonded, they did a 25 cents, 0.25% of sales tax. That's when Governor Schwarzenegger came in, they said, they bonded, they had to get money for operations, so they took a big bond out, and they, stipulated that 0.25% of sales tax would go to that. So, they did a.
0.25% that used to go to local government.
Yes.
Right.
So that's what it's called, the triple flip. So, that would took money from the local government, they would backfill with property taxes. Well, that, and then that was, the other problem was property taxes started to skyrocket, right? Back 2004 to 2008.
Right.
So the state realized, wait a minute, we kind of, property taxes are going up, now the local municipalities, the government agencies are benefiting from that, right? We're getting more, and we have to, we're only getting sales tax. So that's where the triple flip is. So it's a game of chess, basically.
But the risk is they could take it away from us.
The risk is it's gonna be depleted. Why? Because they have to fund the schools. And that's why the
Other
schools are.
schools, not our schools.
Not our schools, but.
Other schools.
Other schools, yeah. So in a sense, it's all sitting in this ERAF fund. And right now, that's why we got more money, because there's, the revenue limit for our schools do not need it. But eventually, the state is gonna take that money, there's argument.
Retroactively or prospectively?
Going forward, they're gonna use that money up. And what the plan is, they're using that money to backfill us on triple flip, on the vehicle license fee swap. That's already our money, but it's like they're taking that money.
They took it from us in the 90s.
Yeah.
To fund their Prop 98 requirements, so our property tax level down in the 90s because the state took it away to fund their budget obligations for schools.
Was there talk now to take this money away?
Well, we don't have it. It's the state's money, and what they're doing now, it's technically ours, but so they put it into this pool for, that's ERAF. And in most counties throughout the state, the schools, let's say this is a graph of the money that the schools get. If a school is missing and not hitting the Prop 90 requirements, so they're not getting enough money, the state's gotta fill this in somewhere. And what they use is the ERAF money to fill in that gap, to make sure that that school has the minimum funding required. This money is technically ours. So at the end of any year, whatever's left over in the ERAF, they distribute back to local agencies, and that's what we get every year in terms of ERAF revenue. What they're saying now, though, is they're gonna allocate larger and larger portions of this pie to do the triple flip and other obligations that the state's on the hook for. They're gonna use our money to pay us back.
Won't get it.
And we're gonna lose our excess.
Yes.
And the state gets more money because they're already taking it through the triple flip, the
Well, should we
VOF.
set up a reserve for that amount of money, so if they take it, we have it?
Well, that's what when we budgeted, we anticipate that eventually will dissipate, will go away.
But
For
But I
us,
say, what does that have to do with the topic?
Well, because of the reserve, we're trying to figure out how much reserve we should allocate. And the
Well, the
question is-
reserve's got to do with all kinds of things from.
Well, but it's 800,000.
That's just one thing.
I think to the chair's point, it's a threat against the general fund revenue. If we lose the $800,000 in revenue to the general fund, it may need to be offset by something.
That's just a rationale to support increasing the reserves,
Right.
as opposed to the position I would take against the council member who wants to put all the money in first contribution. We have capital projects in this town that need to be addressed, and we need to address those more.
Right.
Having said that, for the two politicians here, that becomes a political problem. If the citizens find out you shifted all the money to employees' retirement funds, and did not fix the pothole in front of their streets, you got a problem. This is Chicago board hearing 101. Fill a pothole. So my position would be we shift some of this money, a significant fund, into capital improvement projects in this town. Also protect the situation if the parcel tax does not pass. There would be that capital improvement money would be gone. So that's my position, as opposed to further funding pension plans at this point, is to put.
Jim, they've gone through now, and taken 5-year estimates of capital expenditures.
I don't know, that was the
They
city
have.
manager, but, you know, you
They have.
can get in a project like, a situation like Detroit, where the infrastructure's totally gone away, deferred maintenance has been deferred to put the money elsewhere, and you got a problem. I mean, you just don't have the infrastructure that you should have, and I think in this town, we need to shore up the capital project. I think Bob was alluding to that.
Jim, you're really hurting my heart comparing us to Detroit.
City council.
I'm sure they do.
I'm from Cleveland, so I can relate.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think our facilities are pathetic.
Yeah.
That can only be done, you know, we're gonna rebuild our town center, with private contributions. We can't use any of our taxpayers' money to fund the capital improvement of building our town center. So just get that out of everybody's head.
Well, let's say you get halfway done and you run out of money.
Well, you continue, you fundraise. I mean, because we voted on it, the ballot measure said that specifically it could not,
Said, would you support building it if it's with private funds?
private funds only,
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
And it says yes.
Yeah. One of the Jonas.
Oh, fine.
So we're restricted, we can use general fund money to pay in support of the master plan.
Sure.
And once we actually get to the construction of the project, it's all gotta be private funds.
Private funds.
So-
As the chair was alluding, we have 5 years of capital project plan.
I'm assuming that they've estimated $9 million, so I assume that's adequate.
We better figure out a way to start paying this.
Well, and if I can add, I mean, I think of these three options, one of the recommendations isn't like only pick one. It can be a combination of all three.
Yeah.
It sounds like
No,
there are,
right.
the three of them are very important. It's just one with the pension, with the CalPERS, we have to do a sensitivity analysis to actually find a gap. But in the meantime, we can come up and decide, maybe we just put a flat amount for that. Maybe we add a flat amount to capital projects, but, and also for reserves. And again, this is something that we don't anticipate to get finalized today, but it's something that, to start a discussion and figure out what is a way, because they're all three are important.
Yeah.
It's just,
Well, George, should we sit and look at those $9 million and say, does that bring our roads and streets up to where we want them? And then we can deal with that number as a finite amount. Is that,
Well, we have a capital projects budget, we have a capital projects fund. We received $743,000 from the parcel tax, and the remainder, another $500,000 or so from other revenue sources. You could augment that per year. You could augment that by, $500,000 a year.
no, but you've identified projects, I understand, for 5 years.
Yes.
So I guess the question, does it satisfy two of these members'
My
concerns
question
about the
also
roads?
going forward is the parcel tax is not a given. That additional money may not be there.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta face that as a reality
That's
for
right.
political.
Well, I think that the unknown here is how much money do we need for capital?
Yeah, I'm just saying, as opposed to giving it to pension plans, we should put a higher allocation into building and maintenance.
Might I interject through the chair, is that Bob and Jim both, obviously our estimates are estimates. And we found that the cost of doing projects that we're foreseeing in 5 years, our costs are going up, considerably. So some consideration for some of those large capital improvement projects, our costs are probably pretty conservative. And then there's always the unknown capital improvement projects where certain things fail, and those are big ticket items,
Well, like replacing our serious light, systems in Lloyd Park, or, upgrading our,
Right?
What about Marsh Road, isn't that a?
well,
It's
Marsh Road,
it's got
the
to be,
channel on
right.
Marsh Road is an issue that
Yep.
we have to take a look at.
Is that in your $9 million?
Yes.
Diane.
So Marsh Road is anticipated.
Yes. Where we're short is about $3 million.
We are on.
We allocate about $1.2 to $1.3 million in revenue each year to the capital projects fund, but $9 million over 5 years puts us about $3 million short of funding that in its entirety.
So what they're
That's
saying,
not that every project will go forward, though.
Yeah, yeah.
but based on the ones that you estimated, we're 3 million short of being where we want to be for the next 5 years. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And if we lost the parcel tax, it would be another 700,000 each year.
Each year.
3.5.
So it'd be
8.5.
5.
3.5 million.
3.5.
Sorry to come so late in the discussion, but the meeting that was on the other night and the feasibility study that was brought in and the push point to the residents on what they're willing to agree to or not, I don't think anybody better plan on trying to increase that number.
Oh, the parcel tax number?
Absolutely.
I don't think that's
In
what we're
fact,
talking about.
But just, you know, as we're saying, that number might go away.
Oh, I
Or
think,
you know what I'm saying, I think they've hit their max.
right, but I think he was talking about the allocation, the 40%, 60% allocation. But that was just, well, actually, that's not what we're talking about. What we were talking about is that 20 million reserve, the general fund, how we would allocate that, and, you know, if we put more towards paying down the pension and OPEB, or put more to our reserve policies, or more to the capital projects, that kind of thing. I think that's what.
Well, I think we've talked about the capital projects probably enough to get a handle that the risk could be as high as 5 million if we lost the parcel tax. But if we maintain the parcel tax, then it would be 3 million.
I'd like to make one more comment on the roads and streets capital projects. If the state, again, takes a look at what we have, they're gonna see we're not spending money on infrastructure and stuff like that, which would make them more inclined, in my opinion, to take money away from other reserves or other accounts that we have. Because they're saying, well, you guys got a lot of money sitting in these bank accounts that's doing nothing, and then you got potholes over here. Again, I come back to my pothole analogy. That if you already spent the money on asphalt, the state can't take it. It stays here in town.
Well, Jim, I think you should look at the $9 million and be satisfied that if we accomplish that we're taking care of the potholes.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And if we are, then I think we just need to decide how much of the reserve we should set aside that we aren't gonna generate through the parcel tax and the other sources in the next 5 years.
We can't take care of the $9 million just right now.
No, but I'm just saying, we at least know what the shortfall is between the revenues and expenses for these capital expenditures over the next 5 years. And it's, if assuming we keep the parcel tax, it's $3 million, isn't that right? Is that right, Robert?
If it's 3.5, if we lose it, that's.
Well, we're not assuming that we'll lose it.
I would assume the number one priority of our
Great.
menu is our reserve adequate? And for emergencies, whatever they might be.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Starting with the failure of the parcel tax to pass, the
Well,
earthquake, flood, I mean, I don't know.
but back to Detroit, we ought to be sure there's enough money for pensions and OPEB so that, you know, if, as and when circumstances force CalPERS to come clean and they need a whole lot more money, that we've saved up the money for it.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but right now we're fully funded.
No.
Well, all our side funds have been paid off. We have a required contribution, both for OPEB and for CalPERS, to pay every year, and we'll continue to be caught up until they figure out the accounting's wrong, if they do. I'm not an alarmist like you seem to be, and several other people that think that CalPERS isn't making any money. It's a moving target. We're looking at data from 2011. CalPERS investments made 20.9% in 2011, another 13.3% so far in 2012.
Yeah, if you take a little longer time period, like from 2000, it's.
I have all the numbers here.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Okay, how did CalPERS, what's their rate of return from the year 2000 until now? It's nothing like 26, they're picking one,
No, I understand
Yeah.
that, but they're fairly smart guys up there, and I don't think they're in a panic. And I just think when we get the new numbers, our deficiency in funding and what we have funded already will be a significantly bigger number when we get to the 2012 numbers.
it's
No, but I
not,
think
it's
the
not
point
their
here-
smarts, it's their political, I mean, they weren't stupid in Detroit either. They just,
I don't
Had
know, I
political-
wasn't there.
Well,
That made the
factors.
decisions.
but I think from a priority standpoint, the pensions and OPEC are probably something we're probably gonna have to do if we have a choice between the potholes and the pensions. Because if we don't
Oh,
pay,
yeah, that has to happen,
Yeah,
right,
I think,
that's not what I meant.
yeah.
And I agree that we have to take care of that. There's no way that we can craft a policy today, particularly given the uncertainty of the parcel tax, that's gonna let us get to X percent unfunded, the moving target that's gonna be smaller shortly. The OPEB thing, our capital project shortfall, and a reserve policy that we think is right. So I think we have to start with one, figure out what that number is, and then move to the next priority. You feel it's pensions, could be, Jim thinks it's potholes, could be. But I think, George, what do you think? The reserve that we have right now, $1.5 million, is that an adequate reserve policy?
Well, that's only
That's only
15%.
50% for emergency.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, we have another 2 million unassigned reserve, so we have 3.5 million.
but that's 15% of this total. But if you look out there and say, well, what would a really bad
Disaster.
earthquake, they say when the really bad one comes, we're gonna have a lot of
Yeah.
streets ripped up and so forth.
Well, Obama will send us money.
That
Is $1.5 million emergency
goes
reserve?
on in Detroit.
Do you feel for our size budget, the situation we have, is that the right number, or should it be significantly larger?
Well, our total reserve should be significantly larger. Now, that can be a combination of an emergency reserve and a contingency reserve totaling up to something, 15% is the low range, 50% the luxury in many communities. So somewhere in between there is where our target should be, and it could be used for anything if it was an emergency. 15%, plus we could access the additional 20%.